right, all right. Well, hey, thank you for joining me on this Wednesday and another Bible study. And I won't be with you too long today. This will be just a quick moment in the Word, right? And so a minute in the Word. But I do want to encourage you today. Hopefully your week is going well. It's so funny. What we're going to discuss today has to do with start dealing with certain circumstances and being encouraged and not being afraid. And today is one of those days where I'm always encouraged by the Word, but today is one of those days where the Word cuts a little closer today. And so I want to encourage you guys today not to be discouraged, not to be afraid. And we're going to look at in Chronicles, Second Chronicles. We're going to be looking at Hezekiah, and I'll give you just a quick backdrop on Hezekiah. We're going to be looking at Second Chronicles chapter 32, verses 7 through 8. Hey, Linda, how are you doing? Blessings to you as well. Good to see you. And so we're going to look at Second Chronicles chapter 32, verses 7 through 8. And again, I just want to give you a quick backdrop on what is happening here. There is a situation that's taking place. You have King Sennacherib, who is the Assyrian king. They are, if you know anything about Assyria, Assyria was one of those great nations that came through and conquered many. And now they have made their way to Israel. Judah is on their plate. They have just come through. They have demolished Judah. Judah is just in peril. And Hezekiah, who was a good king, is the king who is in control. And if you look over at 2 Kings chapter 18, you'll get the full backdrop of this particular story. But just so you know, Hezekiah is a good king. He's a king who follows the Lord. He loves the Lord. But in 2 Kings chapter 18, you'll see Hezekiah kind of submit to King Sennacherib, again, who was the Assyrian king. Remember, Sennacherib is coming with his armies of over 100,000. And so he's coming through. He has now demolished Judah. You're the king there. You're looking around. Your area is in peril. And over in 2 Kings chapter 18, Sennacherib has imposed, he says, hey, listen, Hezekiah, you pay me in silver and gold. You pay me and I won't completely wipe you out, right? And so Hezekiah is going about doing that until one of the prophets comes and speaks to him and tells him it's not the way to go, right? And so I want to read to you first and foremost from 2 Chronicles 32, verses 7 through 8. This is in the Old Testament. I want us to pick up, right? We kind of know what's taking place, and we're talking about being afraid. We're talking about being discouraged. Hezekiah has the right to be afraid. He has the right to be discouraged. What he's looking at total devastation. His area has been demolished, right? The person who demolished Judah is now telling him, pay me or I'm going to completely wipe you out, right? And so he has every right to be afraid. He has every right to be discouraged. But when we look at 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verses 7 through 8, I want to read it to you, and it says this. It says, be strong and courageous, right? We've seen that in the scripture several times, but we see it here again. It says, be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid or discouraged before the king of Assyria or before the large army that is with him. For there are more with us than with him. He has only human strength, but we have the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. So the people relied on the words of King Hezekiah of Judah. All right, so in this particular text, which is an extremely encouraging text, and we're going to revisit this text just in a few short seconds, but Isaiah has given Hezekiah a word. And Hezekiah has now relied upon that word. And Hezekiah tells the people, here's the king talking to his people who are looking out at all their problems, right? And he tells them to be strong and be courageous. And what Hezekiah is communicating to his people is to have a right attitude. And when we talk about attitude, we need to understand that attitude is what you think and how you behave, right? What you think and how you behave. So when you have a problem, when you have a circumstance, you ought to address your problem and your circumstance with the correct thinking and the correct behavior, right? So your thinking and your behavior have to match. And what Hezekiah is communicating, he's saying, be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid or discouraged, right? And what he's telling them is to let's attack this thing head on. Let's get the correct attitude, and not only let us have matching thinking and matching behavior, but he says, let's go ahead and attack what's before us head on. Yes, we're in peril. Yes, things look bad. Yes, we have outside pressure coming on us. But he says, let's deal with this thing head on. And in our situations, oftentimes, we don't have the right attitude, right? We go into a situation, sometimes not, our thinking may be one way, our behavior may be another, right? And so we don't have the, excuse me, 1 second. Hey Siri, stop. Sorry about that, guys. All the Hey Siri, stop. I do apologize. Technology. All right, so oftentimes when we go into a situation, hey Siri, stop. I don't know what's going on, guys. Hey Siri, stop. All right, 1 second, guys. Let me step away. The beautiful thing about being live is there's always room for error, right? There's room for error in recording things, but live is a little bit more interesting. So, but again, I'm sorry, I do apologize. But the one thing we want to see, bad Siri, that's right. She was doing her own thing. I had to unplug her, right? Now, if I wanted her to work while I was online, I probably couldn't get her to work, but we see she's working on her own. All right. Anyway, oftentimes when we have a situation, what we don't have is the right thinking and we don't have the right behavior, or we have mismatched situations, right? So sometimes our thinking and our behavior match in a negative fashion. And then sometimes our thinking is one way. We may think positively, but with our behaviors, we do things to get ahead of God, which always results in something not working out right with us. And so here Hezekiah is telling his people to be strong, to be courageous, and he's telling them to face their circumstance head on. And I've been in situations before where I haven't faced my situation head on, right? I'll for instance, sometimes you receive a phone call and you dodge the phone call, right? And there's certain behaviors where we're not attacking something head on. And so what Hezekiah is doing for us is giving us the correct way to not be afraid, right? He's giving us a recipe for not being discouraged. And he says, do not be afraid or discouraged. And I love what he says here. He says, before the king of Assyria. He names the problem. And this is good for us because we can look back on the king of Assyria. This is This situation that took place is over 3,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago, yet we still know the name Sennacherib, right? We can look up the exploits of Sennacherib and all that he's done. We know that Sennacherib had a large military. We know that he was a great conqueror. And his father was also, Sargon was also a great conqueror. But Hezekiah is saying, here is our situation. This is our exact problem. And our exact problem is the king of Assyria. And I think what we can learn from this and looking at this is what we need to do is oftentimes detail our exact problem. Whatever our circumstance is, we need to say, don't be afraid or discouraged before ... Whatever your problem is, right? And Hezekiah communicates the problem. The problem is the king of Assyria. And he goes on to detail, or before the large army that is with him. And then he tells the people this. He encourages them in this way. Here's his moment of encouragement, right? He says, for there are more with us. Let's pause right there. He says, for there are more with us. He just detailed that they had a large army. Not only do we know that they had a large army, not only do we know, but they knew that they had a large army. And the reason that they knew they had a large army, because Sennacherib has just demolished their territory. They were not only to see that they had a large army, but they also were able to see the power of this large army. And Hezekiah says, for there are more with us than with them. Now that may seem, for them, how is this even possible? This seems paradoxical that you're saying there is more with us than with them. We see what they have. They have outnumbered us. We're unable to match them in military might. But then Hezekiah goes on to say, Sennacherib only has human strength. Sennacherib only has human strength. He's saying you're just looking to these people for the physical, right? He says human strength is limiting. There's limitation in human strength. We've already seen through David what can happen when you rely solely on human strength. David and Goliath. David did something that was impossible. He took out a great and grand warrior, right? By just a few smooth stones and a slingshot. He did something that was greater than what we could conceive in our human eye. And Hezekiah goes on to say he has only human strength, but we have the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. And Hezekiah, who is someone, as the scriptures communicates, it says that Hezekiah did right before the Lord. He did right in the sight of the Lord. Hezekiah had a true love for who God was, so much so that he lived in a particular way. He lived right before the Lord. And so now, in a moment of peril, in a time where he needs the Lord, he's encouraging people through the Lord. And for us, when we have our situations and our circumstances, whatever they be, whatever the size, whatever the details of our situations, we need to remember to encourage ourselves in the Lord, not to look at the human aspect of everything, right? Oftentimes we always look at what man can do and we forget what God can actually do, right? God is the one who allows things to happen, right? And so if it does not pass through God's hand, then guess what? It will not happen to you, right? And so he's telling us in this text, he says they only have human strength, but we have the Lord our God to help us, and not only to help us, but to fight our battles. Guess what? Either you can fight or you can let the Lord fight. And I want to assure you that if God fights your battles, the victory will be yours. It says, let's let God fight our battles. And then it goes on in the very end. It says, so the people, and I love this part, And this again is a message to us. It says, so the people relied on the words of King Hezekiah of Judah. The people relied on the words of Hezekiah of Judah. These people relied on the word of God because Hezekiah was speaking what Isaiah had encouraged him with. And so these people are relying on what God has said. Not only are they relying on what God has said, but they're also relying on what God has done. In 2 Chronicles, it details the good kings and it details the bad kings. And it demonstrates for us, we see God's hand in all of this. God blesses those, right, who live rightly. And God punishes those who don't live circumspectly. And so Hezekiah, being one who loves God, Hezekiah has the favor of the Lord. And I want to read to you in 2 Chronicles, picking up here in 32, starting at verse 8. There's a speech that goes forth from Sennacherib. And Sennacherib his servants actually are speaking on his behalf. They come through and they completely dog the Lord out. I mean, they say the most negative things possible about God, right? Not only do they say negative things about the God of Israel, but they also talk about false idols, how the other people who they beat, that those people's God, those gods were weak as well. And they said, now we're here in Israel and you're telling us about your God. And guess what? We demolished your Judah, so your God is nothing as well, right? And so I just want to read you a quick snippet, and I'm going to jump around just so you can kind of see what takes place next. But here's Sennacherib's servants speaking, 2 Chronicles 32, starting at verse 9. It says, after this, while King Sennacherib of Assyria with all his armed forces besieged Lachish, he sent his servants to Jerusalem against King Hezekiah of Judah and against all those of Judah who were in Jerusalem, saying, this is what King Sennacherib of Israel says. What are you relying on that you remain in Jerusalem under siege? Look at the question he just asked. He says, listen, I just demolished Judah. Why are you guys hanging around here in Jerusalem? What are you relying on? You guys are foolish. He says, listen, if I were you and you seen what I've done to you, you would go ahead and you would get up out of here now, right? He says, what are you relying on that you remain in Jerusalem under siege? Isn't Hezekiah misleading you to give you over to death by famine and thirst when he says, now pay attention to this because they're playing off Hezekiah communicating the words from God. They're saying he's misleading you with these words from God. You're about to die from famine and you're about to die by our hands. And he says, isn't Hezekiah misleading you to give you over to death by famine and thirst when he says, the Lord our God will keep us from the grasp of the king of Assyria? Didn't Hezekiah himself remove his high places and his altars and say to Judah and Jerusalem, you must worship before one altar and you must burn incense on it? Don't you know that what I and my fathers have done to all the peoples of this land? He's saying, do you guys not recognize what I've done so far? I've destroyed everybody. He says, have any of the national gods of the lands been able to rescue their land from my power? Remember, I told you he made fun of those other nations' gods as well. He said, I wiped them and their gods out as well. And he goes on to say here, he says, who among all the gods of these nations that my predecessors completely destroyed was able to rescue his people from my power, that your God should be able to deliver you from my power? He says, so now don't let Hezekiah deceive you, and don't let him mislead you like this. Don't believe him, for no God of any nation or kingdom has been able to rescue his people from the power of my fathers, right? How much less will your God rescue you from my power? He is sown a seed of disbelief. He has made them afraid in his communication, right? The other gods couldn't do it, and guess what? Your God can't do it. That's what he's telling them. And he says, just like the national gods of the lands that did not rescue their people from my power, so Hezekiah's God will not rescue his people from my power. He's being specific. Now he's getting in there. He's almost saying, back in the day, you get angry with somebody, you just don't attack him, but you might attack his mother, right? And that's what Sennacherib was doing. He's saying not just the God, but he said Hezekiah's God cannot defend you from my power. And he goes on, he says, then they called out loudly in Hebrew, they're making fun of him, to the people of Jerusalem who were on the wall to frighten and discourage them in order that he might capture the city. They spoke against the God of Jerusalem like they had spoken against the gods of the peoples of the earth, which were made by human hands. Now, watch this. Watch how God answers all of this. I want you to pay attention. And as you think about your circumstance, right, just put yourself in this situation, knowing all that Israel was facing, knowing all that Jerusalem and Judah had undergone. Put yourself in this situation and see how God of Israel helps out his people. He says, King Hezekiah, this is verse 20, starting at verse 20. King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah, son of Amos, prayed about this and cried out to heaven. So they're crying to the Lord, right? And the Lord, here's how he responds, sent an angel who annihilated every valiant warrior, leader, and commander in the camp of the king of Assyria. Wow. The Lord sent one angel to completely annihilate all of his best valiant warriors, all of his best leaders, all of his commanders in the camp, right? And look what happened here. It says, so the king of Assyria returned in disgrace to his land. One angel sent this great man of 100,000, right? An army of 100,000, sent him packing. The same way he came in is the way he went out, because of one single solitary angel that was released by God. It says, so the king of Assyria returned in disgrace to his land. He went to the temple of his God, and there some of his own children struck him down with the sword. So Sennacherib was attacked by his own people with the sword. Verse 22 says, so the Lord saved Hezekiah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so Hezekiah and all the people, from the power of King Sennacherib of Israel, and from the power of all others. He gave them rest. That's important. You'll see that in Hebrews as well. But that rest, that true peace can only come from God. It says he gave them rest on every side, right? And it says many were bringing an offering to the Lord to Jerusalem and valuable gifts to King Hezekiah of Judah. And he was exalted in the eyes of all the nations after that. All right. So we see trusting in the Lord brings forth deliverance. It doesn't matter the size of your problem or your circumstance. The one thing you need to recall, right? The one way you can always be encouraged is looking at how Hezekiah dealt with this situation. He relied simply not on human might, right? He even recognized, he said, hey, these other folks, they rely on human strength, right? He says, I am relying on God, right? The word of God. He prayed to God, right? He sought godly counsel. Him and Isaiah cried out to the Lord, and the Lord responded. God responded in their situation. And it's so interesting that Sennacherib was boasting of all his great might, and yet the Lord answered Sennacherib again with just one single solitary angel and completely wiped him out. Sent him the same way he came in. Not even sent him the same way he came in, but he was attacked by his own family with the sword. Remember, we need to let God fight our battles. We need to let God handle our circumstances. This is important to living this Christian life, right? Because oftentimes in your might, you're going to mess something up. And so Hezekiah was wise enough to understand. He tried that. Remember, if you want to see what happens, read 2 Kings chapter 18. And when you read 2 Kings chapter 18, you'll see that he tried to do it his way. And what he did was he tried to, again, Sennacherib says, hey, pay me this amount of money and I'll get off your neck. And so he tried it. But guess what? He was wise enough to understand this is not the way to do it. I'm going to let the Lord handle my situation. And so I want to encourage you to today. I told you that I'd only be here a short while. Hopefully I haven't violated that too bad. But I just want to encourage you today. Don't be afraid. Don't be encouraged. Have the right mind and also have the right behavior. They ought to match as it pertains to being strong and courageous. And remember to handle your situations head on. I don't care what they are. You need to handle your situations and circumstances head on. Don't dance around them, but face them head on. Don't try to pay them off, right? Make sure that you handle them head on. When it looks like you're at the end of your rope, you need to understand that God is one who always provides a way, right? Greater than you can even think of, he can provide a way for you. And so just want to encourage you in that way. Look forward to seeing you next week, 6:30. I got all sorts of stuff going off back here. I do apologize. Days at 10 a.m. you can join us here for Sunday service as well as in person. So we still are in person. We're practicing wearing a mask. We're also doing social distancing. So we're trying to do all the correct things in order to protect people. So, all right, good people. Thank you again. And I do look forward to seeing you all next week. You guys have a great week in the Lord. Great rest of the week in the Lord. All right, guys. God bless.